Good evening. It is Wednesday, August the 21st, about 6:45 p.m. This is meteorologist Shay Gibson bringing you a forecast update for the CORA Indigo Cup to Georgetown race starting Friday at 3 and 5 p.m. So two different classes sailing out, 3 and 5. We got some wind to talk about, some different activities maybe involved with some short waving. I did discuss that on Monday night in the video where usually when we get an east-northeast wedge set up for longer than 2 to 3 days, sometimes things get a little wonky towards the end. We'll talk about that in just a second. Let me go ahead and put myself down here in the corner. Here's the website for CORA, and you go down to where the Indigo Cup here, sponsored by Ashley Yachts. You can get all the sailing information. You can still sign up now. It's not too late if you want to give that a whirl. Any questions, info at jackalterman.com. The skipper's meeting is going to be tomorrow night at 5:30 at the Ashley Yachts location off of Lockwood Boulevard. So make sure to be at that meeting. Also, is the place to find this information. So it's under Skipper's info, offshore wind and weather is where this forecast, the prior one is located here on the website if you want to watch that one and watch this one so you can kind of see the pattern working into today's update and into Friday as well. But that's where this is located. So let's take a quick look at the WPC surface map. Got my draw tool out here. And the big player this week is this Great Lakes high pressure. It's more of a Ohio Valley high by tomorrow as it starts to shift a little bit south and east over time. It starts to settle into the Carolinas and head east out over the Atlantic by Friday and into Saturday as well. So that's the big player. We have an old front sitting to our south, a little bit of troughing, coastal troughing nearby in Georgia just to our south, some clouds and some a little bit of thunderstorm activity occurring earlier. Some of that's moved inland. And we got some upper shear coming across from the west southwest down there. So things a little wonky down that way. But for us, we've had a straight east northeast or east flow for today, reach 16 to 20 knots, in some cases 21 knots for averages with mid 20s. And that's going to continue into tomorrow. I think tomorrow may be a little up and down. We may see a little bit of that wonkiness, some of that near shore troughing come in. But otherwise, Friday it pans out with another east northeast event. And if we go forward, I'm going to walk this map forward. So as we get into Thursday, that high pressure starts to settle right over the Ohio Valley and then starts to head east as we get into Thursday night and into Friday morning. This is where it's going to be sitting. It's going to be sitting right over the Appalachians, over Pennsylvania, West Virginia, whatnot. And what happens is we continue to see this east-northeast wedge driving down around it, and we have warm front activity that's going to be, you see this little isobar that's making a little bump. Things are going to start to try to push north, right, along a warm front. And what that means for us on Friday is we could start to see some of this activity developing off the South Carolina coast, what's called shortwave activity, where little low pressures or embedded lows try to develop, where cool air advection is still occurring over warm waters. So you have a little bit of instability diving down, and then you get a little bit of warm air, moist air coming up from the south, mixing in with that. And sometimes you get these little lows that start to spin. Basically, what happens is your east flow becomes more of an offshore northeast flow. So you're going to be watching for that very closely Friday afternoon to evening, and tomorrow I'll have a little bit more guidance on this. But Friday's winds could end up being fairly moderate through the day to a certain point when that warm front gets a little closer and some of that activity comes in near the coast. And I've got some preset models in my run. That's one thing of concern about the winds not being very consistent. They may try to back from an easterly flow back to a northeast flow of about maybe 20 to 40 degrees versus 90 degrees. So that's going to be a huge difference in the tactics that you use to get up the coastline. Real quick, just to show you some visible satellite imagery right now, pretty clear out there, a few clouds in the sky, but you can see the streamlines and wind vectors are all really ramping this east-northeast wind up, and we call this backdoor sea breezing when we have a front draped to our south. We get this parallel or just onshore flow of that east-northeast backdoor sea breeze effect, which ramps up those winds along our coastline. So that's why we've had that moderate to nearly strong flow today. And like I said, we're going to take a look at some of the models here for winds. I'm going to pick the Capers near shore buoy for this one. We know that closer to land at nighttime, winds tend to back more northeast and north. That's radiational cooling properties make that happen. As the sun comes up, then the winds veer onshore at some point. It was late morning this morning, but I'm going to use this model with all available just to get an idea of what we're looking at for Friday offshore. Onshore could tell a different story. And now we're starting to see the HRRR moving into the mid-afternoon hours. at 2 p.m., starting to back north-northeast. And I have a feeling the NAM3 is doing this as well. You can see the lime green here. The NAM3 is really one that I watch for at least 2 to 3 days out. The HRRR getting where you're about 18 to 24 hours out, and even a little bit beyond. This one right here, I'll be watching for the 2 kilometer ratio to see what it's going to be talking about. But we start to see a little bit more of a trend here with the NAM12 and the NAM3 starting to get a little bit more offshore with that shortwave activity Friday afternoon. So this is going to be a real trick. I think we're going to still see some wind, but it may not be that 18 to 22 knot period that we're going to see in the morning with that east-northeast flow. I think we'll see that onshore flow early, and then as we go through the day, it'll be backing offshore. And the farther you are offshore, the more wind you're going to see anyway. So we're going to still call for my call for Friday afternoon at the start out in the middle of the harbor is still going to be 14 to 18 knots. Whether or not it's east northeast or north northeast, I still think we're going to have some gradient backing on it. But if that short wave comes too close to shore, we may see down around 10 to 12 knots. And that's another thing that happens in short waving. Near shore, short waving comes on shore. It has impacts all the way around. So getting out of the harbor Friday could be a little bit tricky if that occurs. Like I said, tomorrow I'll have a little bit more guidance, or have a lot more guidance on this and make a good call for it. But overnight, Friday night, as you get up the coastline, we'll see winds backing more north-northeast naturally anyways, and probably 8 to 12 knots. By the time you finish up in Georgetown, we might be looking at 8 to 12 or possibly 10 to 14 as you round into the Winyah Bay area and head up into Winyah Bay towards the finish line. So that's, or the finish point might be in somewhere in this area. But I would say all in all, the course for winds is you're going to come out, you're going to hook out past the mark, and you're going to run the run line, right? Because if it's an east wind, you'll be able to run the run line pretty well all the way up and then hook in or come in closer to the coastline. Now, wave activity is going to be a factor here as well. So if it's a north-northeast wind coming in this direction, maybe even north-northwest, I would say that's a little bit of a stretch. But say north-northeast winds coming out, and you're going to be coming into a headwind, so you may be more broad, more of a reaching tactic to get out and away from this north-northeast wind and then back up the coast where you're more hauling towards it. But if it's an east-northeast wind or an easterly flow, you're automatically going to be in more or less a hauling run to get up the coastline. And the closer you can be, the better, because the reason why is because of our wave factor. If we look at, I'm just going to pick the Capers near shore for this one, because the swell heights built out from this wind for the last 2 days as we get into today, tomorrow, and into Friday morning. The swell heights are already going to be built in. So they've been building all day. We're going to see them build through tomorrow. We're going to be 4 to maybe, I would say 4 feet out at 5 miles, 5 nautical miles out, 5 to 8 nautical miles out. Beyond that, you're looking at higher swell heights Friday afternoon. Now, the swell heights will be coming down. That's the good news. It's a matter of when. And I think that's going to happen slowly Friday night into Saturday morning. So the closer you can be towards the coast without getting too close into the shallows, the better. The farther out, the larger the swell. You're looking at 4 feet at least, 4 to 5, 4 to 4.5 feet, with a 7-second period as we get into Friday afternoon. So short period, high swell, winds maybe even opposing. Now, if those winds start to back out, back offshore and lie down, that swell may lie down with it, but it's still going to be a backing primary swell that's building in with it. So just wanted to kind of tell you about that. If we look at surf line, I did pick one of the points out here just outside of Bulls Bay. I'm going to run it from 4 p.m. tomorrow. Let's see if I can get this thing to work here. Okay, so as we get into Friday morning, we get to 6, 7 a.m., 10 a.m., and this is about, I would say this is about 8 nautical miles out offshore, 8 to 10. We're at 5.6 feet out there, right? So we know that there's going to be some swell height. 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., we see it start to drop off to 3.6, so we're about 4 feet. That's a good sign that it's going to start to lay down throughout the day. Now, it may plane out late afternoon as we get into the evening, where we go down to 2.5 by overnight Friday night, and Saturday morning 2.5 feet. So that's the good news, is as you head up the coastline, the winds, the pressure gradient and the high pressure overall are going to be sinking down into the Carolina coast and weakening over time. So that's the deal with the high pressure that's going to be moving. Once it gets out over the Atlantic, things start to weaken for us and more of a easterly regime sets in. But I'm still going to call for that moderate east-northeast, maybe backing north-northeast in the afternoon with that short waving. Maybe a little tricky. And the other thing is precip. So I definitely want to address that. You can see here in the Euro model, the euro is not really reading that kinking in the atmosphere or that short waving. So this is where I'm kind of divided on it because the euro is not seeing it. I haven't, I've looked at the NAM3. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. But this is as we get into Friday morning, Friday afternoon, into Friday night, and it still holds that northeast gradient in place. Whereas the GFS, we look back, we go to Friday morning, you can see that little circle off the Charleston coast. We see all the kind of, I don't know if you can see it or not in this, but all this kinking going on in the area. Let's circle it. Except by Friday night, even up by Winya Bay, you're seeing the isobars, like the isotachs for wind, are all weird, and they're sort of doing this kind of number right here. So this is what I'm concerned about as far as winds go, because there may be some inconsistencies built around that shortwave activity that could be occurring. Looking at the NAM3, this is Friday morning about 6 a.m. We go out. This is 8 a.m. We see some of that shortwave activity moving into the coastline, so that near shore troughing, trying to do something out there, trying to get a little low pressure spinning up, not anything tropical, but just saying it might cause some storm activities out there as we get into Friday afternoon. Looks like we get some breaking in that. Things start to head out towards the Gulf Stream and closer to that warm front. As we get into Friday night into Saturday, we see some dissipation of that. So this would be the best case scenario. So all of this dissipates by the time the race starts. Usually daytime heating, late morning, early late morning heating starts to get this short waving activity going. And by late afternoon, if it hasn't really done anything, it disperses. So there is some silver lining there. I hope that's going to be of some help where as long as we get past that morning to midday afternoon hours and we don't see a whole lot of activity, it should be fine for overnight. And again, using the Quant buoys, the Cap 2 wave buoy for the nearshore capers is not reporting, which means they probably lost it out there, or it's not reporting, something's wrong with it, or it popped from its mooring, or something's happened. But you can use this one right here, the CHR 60 wave buoy, for a little bit of guidance offshore. This is about 18 miles out, but it gives you swell height. It's a good tool to use. So go to the Corp site for that one. Outside of that, I will see you either virtually or in person tomorrow. I'm not sure. I think the meeting's at 5:30. I have a meeting at 5, so I think Tim's going to try to set me up for a virtual meeting there at the Ashley Yachts place. So look for me there. Either way, I'll have a forecast for you, and we'll go from that point. But for right now, everything looks okay. We don't want to encounter that wonky wind or that rain. More to come tomorrow as we get fresh guidance. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you then.